Alright my super fam, our lovely Raiden Shogun is finally back. And if those of you who are trying to go for Raiden Shogun's pull, I do wish you a very good luck and be able to pull for her if you haven't got her, and if you're trying to get her constellations, I hope that you will win your 50-50s. Now, it's been a while since Raiden Shogun has been back, and there have been a lot of changes towards the character that has been released, as well as new region comes and artifacts domain release, as well as a lot of weapons. So which is why we have today's video looking in depth into some updated build regarding Raiden Shogun, so that for those of you who are new to Raiden, or even for those who have had Raiden for quite some time, have the most updated guides if you are looking to make your Raiden Shogun as good as you can. And so without further ado guys, let us just dive right in. Now guys, regarding the overview of Raiden Shogun's kit, I actually won't be going too in depth here in this video, assuming that you have already got a basic understanding of how Raiden's kit actually work. But I'll just go through some of the most important points here. Is that basically speaking, even though Raiden has really good looking normal attack, we are not going to be leveling up or normal attack in any way, so that can save you quite a lot of material right here. What you want to start focusing on is regarding her E skill, because her E skill basically have 100% uptime, which is an amazing skill for you to apply electro, but more than that, it has pretty decent AoE as well, and that's also perfect if you are looking to trigger Hyperbloom. Since there aren't too many characters in the game that is really good at triggering Hyperbloom as electro character, and mainly there are only Kuki Shinobu and Raiden Shogun at this point in time, many of the other electro character does have a bit of a hard time doing so, which is why Raiden Shogun is a really good support character if you want to in terms of triggering Hyperbloom. Now the most important part regarding Raiden's kit would be her elemental burst, because all of her damage, if you are focusing on building her as a burst DPS, would be her focusing on leveling up her burst. Now she will go into a 7-second burst uptime, where all of her damage now will be converted into electro damage, which cannot be overridden. Plus the more important thing is she has access to super armor during this duration, or in other words, she will never be knocked back in any way. Therefore you can just spam her burst without needing a shield or without even needing to dodge. Therefore Raiden is one of the easier character for, you know, lesser skilled player to be using in the game as well, because she's very easy to control. During this state, even though it looks as if she is doing her normal charge and plunging attack, but all of this damage will be considered as elemental burst damage. Something to note is that Raiden Shogun won't be able to activate Beidou's elemental burst, but he will still be able to work absolutely well with Xingqiu and Yelan, which is a very good thing. Something also to note about Raiden's elemental burst is that it goes with what's called resolve stacks. So whenever your nearby party members, not counting Raiden Shogun herself, use their elemental burst, the resolve stacks will be calculated upon the energy cost of the elemental burst. Therefore, in simple explanation guys, the higher the energy burst cost of your other party member are, the more resolve stacks Raiden will be able to stack upon, and there will be a maximum of 60 resolve stacks at her C0, which also basically indicates that it is recommended to use all of your other team members' burst before you actually go to Raiden and uses her elemental burst upon herself. For her A1 passive talent, whenever your nearby party member gains elemental orbs or particles, Raiden Shogun will gain 2 resolve stacks. Basically a straightforward passive that lets Raiden gain a few more stacks, and usually that would result around 4 to 8 more stacks here in this case. But A4 generally suggests that she's mostly going to be benefiting towards more energy recharge, or in simple terms, the more energy recharge she's able to have, the more electro damage bonus she's going to be having, and her energy restorations from her burst is going to be higher as well, which is a point I forgot to mention. For during her elemental burst, she is also able to restore energy for your whole team, which is why overall on top of all of Raiden's personal damage, you also have access to really good support overall towards your team, because as we've mentioned regarding electro applications, Hyperbloom triggerer, more elemental burst damage for your party members, as well as energy regen for your whole team. team is such a valuable thing that Raiden have access to, and it is something that not many characters in the game have in possessions, which is why Raiden Shogun have still been able to keep most of her value up until this point in the current meta. For yes guys, if we were to be discussing about the meta, there are some points in terms of competition across some of the newer release Fontaine character, which I won't be going in depth in this video because I've already made a whole video discussing how Raiden Shogun is in the current meta, so you can actually check that specific video out after this, and we're just fully going to be focusing on Raiden builds in this video. However, as we have discussed, there are a bit of a new changes towards some of the things after we've had so many characters been released over the years. You know, for example, if you're someone who can invest into Genshin Impact and get some, battle pass and 5-star character, Baiju for example is a newly added 5-star Dendro healer and works absolutely perfect on Raiden Shogun's team. Or if we're going for the newly added weapon in the battle pass, the Ballad of the Ford is also a strong option for Raiden's aggravates as well as Hyperbloom triggerer due to the really good crit rate and EM it gives. But if you are more of a free-to-play player, for example, then we have access to, Kirara. If your team needs a little bit of shielding as well as Dendro application, because Kirara does have decent Dendro application for you, or our newly added Lynette. For if you don't really have Sucrose available on your team, then Lynette is going to be the Anemo Sword for you as well as attack buff, which is still beneficial for Raiden, and also Lynette is an absolutely free 4-star character that you can have once you get to AR 20 or 25 if I remember correctly. Now overall, when we are considering how to build Raiden Shogun, there are actually two main things you want to consider, and that is going to be Raiden Shogun's playstyle, and mainly she's going to be focusing on either you building a Burst DPS playstyle or you're going to be focusing on an EM focused playstyle, or in other words, that is going to be Raiden Shogun's Hyperbloom triggerer. So if you are going to be focusing on building her as a Burst DPS playstyle, or basically the conventional way of before Dendro has been released, then the talent priority you want to look into would be leveling up her Burst talent first, and then next is going to be her skills. Artifacts, her Emblem Fate 4-piece is still always going to be the best artifacts regardless, because Burst DPS prioritizes you to have as much energy recharge stacking on Raiden Shogun as you can. Therefore, when it comes to the 3-piece artifact piece, that would be energy recharge onto the sands, electro damage bonus onto the goblet, and either crit rate or crit damage on your circlet. Now the interesting thing comes when it goes to her weapon building, because for Burst DPS, her best in-slot weapon would definitely be her signature weapon, that is goes without saying. The second best option would definitely be the catch, one of the best free-to-play weapon we have access to in the game. So yes guys, if you don't have the engulfing lightning, just farm the hell out of fishing and try to get the R5 catch and give it to your Raiden Shogun. Other than that, if you have access to, Skyward Spine, Primordial Jade, or even Staff of Homa, if you're not using, on your Hu Tao for example, then yes, those are generally gonna be the next best option to give on your Raiden Shogun. Moving on to the Battle Pass options, the Death Match or the Ballad of the Ford, both are generally gonna be good on your Burst DPS build. Wavebreaker Fins and Lithic Spear are still going to be decently good if you don't really have any other options. And guys, during the time when you're waiting for the catch and you don't really have any other weapons, but you do have the Favonius Lance, then yes, Fav Lance still works on your Burst DPS build. Now, when it comes to Hyperbloom triggerer, this is rather going to be a pretty easy build for you, because all you need to do is focus everything onto building your EM stats. Therefore, first of all, the thing is with talent priority, the most important thing actually is gonna be trying to get your Raiden up to level 90, because character level makes the highest difference when it comes to Hyperbloom build. And then after that, you're gonna be focusing on building your skill talent level, because yes, her E skill is what gonna be triggering Hyperbloom. After that, if you still got your talent to spare, then you can focusing on leveling up her Burst talent. When it comes to artifacts, the Gilded Dream set is technically gonna be the best, so I do really recommend you to to try and farm this artifacts domain, because running alongside with it is going to be the 4-piece Deepwood memory. And yes, that is generally the best set for any of the Dendro character in the game. So if you don't get Gilded Dream, you get Deepwood, and that is going to be usable regardless. Other than that, the Flower of Paradise Lost is generally the highest Hyperbloom damage triggering artifact set for you, but it does run alongside the Desert Pavilion set, which most of the time we're not going to be using. That's why I recommended the Gilded Dream set. But if you are having a hard time trying to go for the 3-piece EM Sands, Goblet and Circlet, then farming for 2-piece Gilded and 2-piece Flower of Paradise is generally going to be easier, because I do know it can be kind of a pain trying to go for 3 EM artifact piece over a full 4-piece artifact build. Now when it comes to weapon building, Hyperbloom Raiden build generally have a little bit more free to play options, because yes, if we are looking into the highest EM giving weapon in the game, that would actually goes to the Dragon's Bane. Now the thing is, you only get Dragon's Bane in the weapon banner pools most of the time, so it's totally fine if you have it or not, because the absolute free-to-play option here would be the Moon Piercer, a Sumeru weapon crafting, a solid option for you to go. The Kitane Cross, it's also pretty good. So this would generally depends on which material you have access to first and your ease of building them. Now if you do have access to the Battle Pass, then at R5 this weapon will be able to give you more EM than Dragon's Bane, and of course it does give you crit rate, so it's pretty good. But yeah, that's only if you have the money to actually go for the Battle Pass every single time, so that's definitely going to come down to your choice. Other than that guys, we actually also have another playstyle, which is Quickbloom playstyle, where this is you running Raiden Shogun in terms of team building that triggers both Aggravates and Hyperbloom itself, which is a build that actually lies somewhere between, you know, the standard Burst DPS or Hyperbloom triggering build. Now generally I don't recommend you to try and go for the middle ground, because it's actually a little bit hard for you to do that. So I generally would just recommend you to either focus on building just Burst DPS or Hyperbloom invested build, depending on which character you have access to in your account and your personal preferences. Now overall it is still okay. For example, if you are using a Burst DPS Raiden Shogun and you still want to use her in a Hyperbloom team, it is still usable. It's not like you're building Burst DPS and you can't use in Hyperbloom Raiden Shogun ever again. Or if you're building her in an EM team and you try and go and have her run in a Burst DPS team, that's still technically fine, though it's not the most efficient way you want to go, but it is still possible, because I know that trying to build many different artifacts can be quite material consuming most of the time. So yes, that is still a thing. Now, after we have already discussed her main 2 playstyle, which is Burst DPS and Hyperbloom building, I know that there is a huge question that you guys have been having on your mind, is that which build is actually going to be better? Is it EM or normal DPS build? And so guys, here is going to be my specific answer for you. The normal Burst DPS Raiden build is generally going to be better if you are investing into Raiden constellations, as well as her signature weapon. So overall, Burst DPS is going to be geared more toward those of you who can invest into Raiden, because the thing with this is that Raiden can technically be used on the 4-piece Hunter set if you have Furina running alongside in Raiden Hyperbloom team. So yes, there you go, you're going to be investing technically in the 4-piece Hunter set as well as pooling for Furina. Now the 2-piece doesn't technically work, but with 36% crit rate it's actually pretty huge. But now your Raiden can actually focus most of everything onto crit damage. And also guys, at C0 I generally do not recommend you to go for Raiden Hyper Carry or Raiden Burst DPS build, because technically speaking that is safe for a C2 Raiden Shogun, and Hyper Carry Raiden Shogun generally wants you to have her signature, which is the Engulfing Lightning, as well as Sarah at C6, which is overall going to be a very invested Raiden Shogun team. Therefore, in other words, if you are a free-to-play player at C0 Raiden with no signature and no Sarah at C6, Hyperbloom teams, or in other words EM invested Raiden Shogun, would generally be the easiest for you, because yes, you're just pressing her E skill, triggering Hyperbloom, because Hyperbloom now is going to be doing the most damage for you, and occasionally casting her burst whenever her burst is available. So those guys will be my answer if you are asking whether EM or Burst DPS is generally the better build for Raiden Shogun. Now we move on to some of the more interesting thing when it comes to Raiden, which is her team build. Yes, after Raiden has been released, there has been a lot more available teams for Raiden to be used, and definitely after Dendro reactions have arisen, her team have been opened up a lot more as well, not to mention when it comes to Fontaine character release. So I'll just be discussing some of her main teams right here. You guys have a look, and I'll be choosing the best team option for this, and I actually won't have time to go for every single variations of Raiden best team here in this video. So first off, it's going to be her general DPS team, or I would just call it the personal national team for Raiden Shogun, and it has always been Raiden Shogun, Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Bennett. Absolutely free to play team for Raiden still up until this point, and it's still one of the better team out there you can have access to. Hyper carry Raiden guys is not for everyone because it's just too much of an invested team for Raiden Shogun, because this team requires Raiden Shogun, Kazuha, Bennett, and Sarah. Kazuha ideally being at C2, C0 is absolutely perfectly fine, but Sarah is really much recommended to be on a C6. Not to mention Raiden is also recommended to be on a C2 with her signature weapon. So yes, this is kind of like an end game Raiden Shogun build for you, very invested and money consuming. Moving on towards the more free to play friendly teams, that would be Raiden Dendro teams, and that goes for Dendro Aggravate. Yes, this team does recommend you to prioritize kind of like a mixture between crit rate, attack percentage, and EM. But yeah, if you're using a Burst DPS Raiden on an Aggravate DPS team, that is still perfectly fine. And then finally, one of Raiden best team as well, and this goes for Hyperbloom build for Raiden Shogun, which is going to be Raiden, Nahida, Furina, and Baiju. Very invested team as well, if you are looking for technically the best option for Hyperbloom. But yes guys, any of this slot can also be replaced by 4-star character options. You know, for example, Raiden Shogun, Yao Yao, Xingqiu, as well as Official or Dendro MC for example. But also if you are looking into an updated but also very much invested team for Hyperbloom Raiden as well, that would comprise of, you know, Raiden Shogun, Neuvillette, Nahida, and Kuki Shinobu for example. A pretty interesting team because yes, Raiden is going to be the Hyperbloom triggerer here with EM build. Kuki Shinobu will also be able to hop. Neuvillette is going to be there as the on-field damage dealer for you. However, during his off time, then Raiden can also be there to trigger her burst, so you can deal more damage number. Now I know that Neuvillette is not the best of a character that have hydro applications, so many of the time you will be dealing aggravate damage with Nahidas as well. So basically this is kind of like a mixture but invested team as well. But if you're someone who really love Neuvillette and Raiden Shogun, then yes, you can technically use both of those characters on the same team. So those guys I would say are some of the most updated teams regarding Raiden Shogun at this point in time. I know that Raiden have access to many different team comps out there for you to use, so if you do have any other available teams that you really like and enjoy, just leave it down in the comment sections and I will get to you there. That should be everything I have to say regarding Raiden's build at this point in time guys. I really hope that was a very informative video for you and you have got a lot out of that. If you're new to the channel guys, don't forget to subscribe as I post a lot of Genshin guides and updated Genshin Impact video for you. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me to this part of the video guys, and with that I wish you a super day and I will catch you on my next video.